I want to sort of start off with just a bit of history. And really, the very reason that school boards were created was to serve as a liaison between the professional educators in a community that they serve, and really to oversee the district. And so, believe it or not, the first school committee was appointed back in 1721. And by the early 1800s, legislation was in place creating what we now know or call school boards. One of the many benefits of putting a team in place was that we actually bring to the table various perspectives and experiences that board members have. And so, we have the best thinking of a number of people to help provide that oversight in the district. Now, undoubtedly, in your time with MASB, you're going to hear us refer to the term governance team. And the governance team, as we define it, is those elected and appointed officials. So typically 7 board members, but there are some exceptions. ISDs, most ISDs have 5. We do have a district, local district, who actually has 9 board members. But it's those board members plus their superintendent. Now, you're going to hear today that they have definitely different and distinct roles and responsibilities, but they are a part of your governance team. And so the work is really meant to complement each other. The board bringing the community perspective to the table, the superintendent being trained professionally and bringing that experience base to the table. So we're going to take a look at roles and responsibilities a bit closer. And let me switch the slide. And so I have to say, this is probably one of the hardest concepts for new board members to grasp. And that was myself included, right? I thought I knew what the job was. I thought I was well prepared. But we run on platforms in our campaigns. We talk about all the things that we'd like to fix or make sure that happen. And then we're finally elected and then only get clarity on what governance and oversight really mean, right? And so in our personal lives, whether we work outside the home or these days, in the home, or whether your work is your home and your family, we roll up our sleeves and we do the work, right? At the least, we might manage the work, but we're really in the detail of it. We're problem solvers. We're the doers. We basically roll up our sleeves. But that's not what governance and oversight is. And that's really management and operations. So this thing called governance is a little bit squishier, right? It's a little bit more removed from the activities of the district, and yet still having a very important role. And so how do we define what an effective board looks like? Where does the information come from about the roles of school board members and how they can have an impact on student achievement? Well, imagine that although we've been around since the 1700s, right, the school boards, there really wasn't any comprehensive research done on the effect that boards had on student achievement. Lots of research out there about superintendents and principals and teachers, but nothing about school boards. And so in the early 2000s, our colleagues in Iowa took on the task to do this research. They partnered with their Superintendents Association, their State Department of Ed, and Iowa University to really study how could we identify the things that make a difference at that board table. And so based on that research, our National School Boards Association took that information and tried to distill it down into a way that was useful information, that we could share out and talk about, so that our boards would indeed have this positive impact on student achievement. So on the slide, you can see this is called the key works of boards. And you can see there that there's 5 areas. The first one being vision. It's all about setting the direction of the district. It doesn't mean the board does that alone, but it does mean that the board ensures that there's a process in place, typically including a lot of stakeholders to determine what do we want to be, and then using accountability as the next piece. How are we going to get there? How are we going to measure the progress? What kind of transparency and standards are we going to put in place? Typically, a board's main function has always been policy. You see that one at the bottom of the circle. And that's, basically a set of guidelines, if you will, that the board adopts. And that's sort of the fence posts that your staff works within. Right. And they're doing the work on a daily basis to make that vision happen. The fourth component is community leadership. And that's really where you are a conduit of that information, right? So you're taking in information from the community, you have structures in place for that to happen. And then you're making sure that the community is fully aware of your decision-making process and all of those things that the district is attempting to achieve. And so that community leadership is really very important. The last one says relationships. And while all relationships are important, this particular research actually shows and talks mostly about the relationship between a board and a superintendent. And when that relationship is healthy, and when that board works well together, we have a really great governance team in place that is really trying to carry out those things that we've identified as our goals. So what does the work actually look like? How do they differ between the board and superintendent? And so some of you may have seen this chart before. If you've already taken CBA 101, our foundational class, I borrowed it from them. And this really helps sort of distinguish between the role of the board, which is the column on the left, the one in the middle, which is your administrator of your buildings, and cabinet level administrators, if you have those, depending upon the size of your district, and then your superintendent. And then the chart on the right, or column on the right, is really your teachers, and it should be all staff that interacts with students, on the ground level. And so you can see that the columns are very different. So at the school board level, you're working, at sort of the 50,000-foot view, right? Where you're looking at big picture. You're really looking at, the organization as a whole. When you take it down a level to the superintendent and those administrators, they're closer to the ground, right? And so in addition to seeing the organization as a whole, they're also looking at various buildings or departments. And so they're a little bit more in the middle. And then last but not least, the teachers and other staff, they're doing the day-to-day work. They're at that classroom level, at the ground level, whether they're food service or bus drivers or such. And so this is a handy chart to keep sort of in your, back pocket, if you will, right? Maybe a folder that you bring to board meetings, just kind of having it at the ready to remind yourself, where should our conversation be? Should it be in that tactical or operational work? No, not really. You really need to be at that strategic level. What do we want the district to be, and how as a board can our work support what it is we're trying to achieve? And so if you haven't taken CBA 101, like I said, this comes from that class. It's a great opportunity to get a really good first blush at some of the training that we offer. And you can take it 3 different ways. You take it in person, which is my favorite, because not only do you learn the content, but you also start to form relationships with board members from other districts as well. You can take it online, virtually, live. We just had a CBA weekend. Some of you probably participated in that. And then we also have an asynchronous online class where you don't really interact with anyone, but the content is there for you to get. And so we try to make it as easy as possible to make sure that you have the information you need to sort of give you a good foundation. So with that, I'm not going to go through every one of the topic areas that I've put in this slideshow, but you are going to get a copy of the slideshow as well as the recording and then some links to some materials at the end of the week when Larissa sends those out to you. So I wanted to put these in here so that you can have them to refer back to. I want you to consider the verbs that you see as you start looking at these various topic areas, right? So in this particular one, when we're talking about vision and values and setting that destination, if you will, for the district, you'll notice that in the superintendent's role, the words are supports, assists, advises, and then ultimately implements. In the board's role, it talks about adopting, right? Taking formal action. And then it talks about communicates, sharing with your community, both internally, your staff and students, and externally with your parents and the rest of your community. And so, again, there's a lot of different topics that we have here. We've got goal setting. Again, you can see some of those same verbs used, right? Where the superintendent is assisting and advising the board in creating goals, periodically reports the progress to the board and community. And then the board's role at this point is really to ensure that that vision is translated into those goals and that, again, you're providing resources. That's typically done through your budgetary process. And some other approvals that you might have around materials and things like that for the curriculum you've chosen. And then you'll see holds the system accountable to goals. That's typically done as part of the superintendent evaluation process. There is actually a mandatory component in your superintendent evaluation, regardless of the instrument that you use, that you must evaluate your superintendent on progress towards district-wide goals. And so monitoring and that evaluation is one of your key functions in this area. We have the educational program, curriculum, materials, that sort of thing. Employment, most of you will have a large number of staff employed by the district. But there's really only one employee that the board has, and that's the superintendent. Everyone else reports to the superintendent, but your superintendent is your employee that you hire, that you supervise, right? And that's done through that evaluation process. And so one of the questions I often get is, what about the rest of the staff? How does the board play a role in that? And this is maybe one of the first areas sometimes that I see new board members maybe make a misstep as they move out of their role of governance and really sort of tiptoe into management and operations. We all come to the board table with some thoughts about staff members in our district. And so at what level should we be involved? And so I've heard board members ask various questions around wanting to be a part of hiring committees or wanting to see who all applied and looking at every resume and even asking for evaluations of individuals. None of those things are governance related. Those are all management and operations. Those are the things done by your superintendent. Board's role in this area really is to make sure that there are structures in place to support the hiring and the professional development and the work of your staff. And so that's a tough one, right? To keep those things separate. It doesn't mean you don't ask any questions in the hiring process and in the supervisory and evaluation process, but your questions are more structure related. Do we have a structure in place that when we're hiring? Are we following that structure? Is it working well for us? If it's not working as well as we'd like it to work, then superintendent, what do you intend to do to change it so that it does work to provide us with effective staff members and highly qualified staff? And so those are the kind of questions you would ask. Again, staying at that governance level and making sure that when you have information that you feel is pertinent and that your superintendent needs to know, that you share that information with them, but that you also understand that it's under their purview at that point to handle what you have shared. And that we as individual board members do not get involved in the actual process of dealing with our staff as it relates to those things. So again, it's one that I see a lot of brand new board members really struggle with. Budget, gosh, one of the biggest things that you'll take on, and it's not too far away. School districts must have a new budget by June 30th of each year. And so you'll be starting to have early conversations about the budget if you haven't had that yet. And you'll be asked to approve that budget in June. And that really sets the stage for supporting all that work that's been identified that you're undertaking in the upcoming year. Other areas include facilities, community relations, and again, you'll have an opportunity to really dig into these at a later date. So here's some common phrases that I think you'll probably hear in your work, really trying to help you, again, understand and, really internalize what that role of governance is versus management and operations. My favorite is the what versus the how. Board members and the board as a whole really are tasked with what do we want the district to be? Your staff then carries that out and they determine how we're going to get that done. If you look on the lower left of the slide, you'll see the little binoculars in the weeds. That's one of the phrases we hear is we're too far down into the weeds. Again, that's really getting into those day-to-day pieces where we, in the role of governance, we don't belong. On the upper right, stay in your lane. Think about cars on a road. The system works because we all know where we're supposed to be. The one in the middle was a favorite of one of our consultants that has taught for us for a very long time, and it's eyes in and hands out, right? So that oversight of looking in, but not in so far that you're actually touching the work. And then the last one, just kind of a little bit of a funny, how many board members does it take to screw in a light bulb? Actually, the answer is 0, because you tell the superintendent that we would like light, and it is then the job of the superintendent to ensure that that happens. So just a little humorous take on that role. But again, my favorite is the what and how. I think that's really clear. We're what we want the district to be. The superintendent and staff determine how it's going to happen. One of the good ways to check in on whether or not we're really sort of staying within our roles and responsibilities, and really, once again, having the greatest likelihood of a positive impact on student achievement is through our board self-assessment process. This process we developed, again, based on that research, right? So we're using best practices from what we know to be things that will positively impact our student achievement. And It's 75 questions. Don't let that scare you. The assessment only takes about 15 to 20 minutes to answer. You do it online, and your whole board decides to undertake this process. And then once the board completes it, it's totally anonymous. But you will receive a report back, and this is just the little charts that are on there is just the first page in the report that you're provided that sort of shows how the breakdown of questions were, and then you'll actually get a breakdown for each individual question. The real value is in having the conversation about where are our shortcomings so that we can make plans for improvement. Where are the areas that we should be celebrating? We're doing really well here, and making sure that we continue to do that good work while still making improvements in other areas. It's free to take the assessment. The report, as I said, is generated and given back to you all, and your board president can determine if they want to facilitate that conversation. We are available to facilitate should you want someone from the outside. But it's a great way to, take a little bit of time to reflect and review and then plan for the future for your own improvement. And typically those plans are around how does our work support the work that we've identified we want the district to do. So that's a little bit about roles and responsibilities. We just wanted to give you, a short overview. You'll hear about roles and responsibilities a lot in a lot of different classes. But, really being able to sort of nail that down and understanding governance versus management and oversight is really key. Also related to that same research, I'm going to shift us into how we actually do the work together, right? So how do we as individuals bring what I would call our best selves to the board table? And then how do we as a board work together at the highest levels so that we're serving our students and our communities? So in 2017, MASB launched what we call our Board of Education Governance Standards. The standards were developed not by us staff. They really were developed by board members across the state so that they would better serve board members, right? We work to build the guiding principles that you're going to see here and the standards. And again, it's about being reflective, using the research-based practices that were identified in the study. And then they're meant to really provide what I would call a shared framework for the board to really help them raise the bar and to live up to expectations as elected officials. And so let's dig in just a little bit. So the benefits of the standards themselves is one, that it provides clarity, both board member to board member, superintendent to board, the public to the board. And for those who are considering seeking a board seat, this really helps them understand better in advance of the commitment what the work actually is. As I mentioned, it helps to set the bar at high levels, by the member, for the members. It allows those who are actually living the work, committed to Michigan students to actually define what our standards should be. And then they create a mechanism for leadership that really is helpful to inform everyone about the value and what informs our service, how we make our decisions, et cetera. And so hopefully it's about working with your legislators to get the best results. And then last but not least, it also provides a framework for improvement. And it really allows each of us and our fellow members to approach our work not only with intention, but also reflection. That word you hear consistently from me, reflection, taking time to do that reflection so that we're constantly assessing and improving our performance, right? Continuous improvement. So we did want the standards to be intentionally concise, not so wordy that we're reading volumes. We wanted it to be written in plain language, right? Because all sorts of individuals come to board service. We didn't need something, out of reach for some people. We wanted to make it just simple, easily understood, and then we also wanted to provide some common definitions of terms, because often we start assuming that we're all on the same page around what a particular word means when indeed we're not. And so there's a glossary in the guide to help you so that when you're reading a particular term, we know exactly what it is that we intended by the use of that term. So here's the elements in the document. It is downloadable from our website. And again, Alyssa will provide you with a link for that. You'll notice that it's broken up into two different parts. A set of guiding principles and standards for the board as a whole. And then in addition to that, there are also principles and standards that talk to the individual board member. And then, as I mentioned, that glossary of terms there. So let's take a look at the first Board of Education standard. These are the principles that were identified that we felt were important in this work of being a board as a whole working together. So accountability, commitment to learning, inclusivity, stewardship, transparency, and vision driven. So the first standard, the Board of Education, in cooperation with the superintendent and stakeholders, establishes and commits to a vision for the school district that emphasizes high expectations for achievement of all students and quality instruction. So that's the first standard. There are 4 for boards, but I want to take you into the questions just on this one so that you can see how we actually use the standard to do that reflective activity, right? So here's some of the questions that are included in the document with it. So if we're talking about establishing and commits to a vision with high standards, some questions might be, has the Board of Education formally adopted a district plan that includes a concise vision statement? Starting there, do we have what some might call a strategic plan? And absent that, have we at least identified a vision? Do we know where we're headed? Another question might be, were stakeholders engaged in that district planning process? Did we reach out to bring people into the process to make them a part of determining what the work should look like? Does the district plan include non-negotiable goals related to student achievement and quality instruction? Our highest, responsibility, right, in making sure that student achievement and quality instruction are taking place on a daily basis. Our school improvement or related turnaround efforts aligned to the district plan. There's an improvement process required by the Michigan Department of Education called MICIP, Michigan Integrated Continuous Improvement Process. Is that a separate plan from the vision and the district plan, or are they integrated, making it seamless so that we're not doubling our efforts in many places? We're being much more focused and very deliberate about the actions we're taking. So there's real value in having conversations around these questions. And that's what we wanted. We didn't want it to just be something a board adopts without the conversation. It's the reflective piece here that we take some time and answer the questions and really talk about what does it look like in our district and how can we make changes to be more in line with these standards that, like, once again, we know is based on that research about how we're going to have a positive effect on student achievement. So there's usually somewhere between 4 and 8 questions for each of the standards that we have. And so, like I said, I just wanted to give you a flavor around this particular standard. So the next standard is the Board of Education governs in a manner that is dignified and worthy of trust. Can your community feel that regardless of whether they agree with you on every item, can they still feel like they can trust the leadership and the decision-making process in your district? Again, a number of questions around that issue to have good, deep conversation about. The third standard for whole boards is that the Board of Education is accountable to the school district community. Are there systems in place to receive feedback? Are the structures there? Have you created a mechanism so that we know whether or not our messages are getting out to our community members? And then again, we're getting an opportunity from feedback to help inform our decision making as we move through the work together. And then the last one for the whole board is the Board of Education holds the superintendent accountable for creating the outcomes identified in the school district plan. And as I mentioned, that is typically done through the evaluation process. Recent legislation has changed the law around superintendent evaluation. A number of years ago, it was required that we would have an annual evaluation process. That was the first legislation that ever required that, although many boards were already doing it. But the newest legislation goes a bit further than that and says not only will you evaluate your superintendent on an annual basis, you're going to do at least a 6-month check-in to say, how are we doing on the things we identified? Where are we in our progression of our goal attainment? And then making plans for some course corrections if they're needed for the next 6 months. So that when you get to the end of the year, there aren't any big surprises. We've had a good conversation, and we can pretty well know what to expect as the outcomes, so that when it does come time for that evaluation process, again, there really shouldn't be any major surprises. We should all pretty much have a good sense of how well we've done over the years and the year, and then, looking to identify areas for improvement for the superintendent through that evaluation process. There are a number of different tools or instruments out there. MASBs is one of them, but your district may use something different. I want to encourage you to take steps early in your tenure over the next month or two here to identify the method of training that your tool provider has for you. All board members must be trained in the tool that they're going to use to evaluate the superintendent. It is your only mandatory training, but you want to make sure and get that taken care of before you find yourself in the evaluation process. And some of you may still be evaluating your superintendent this spring. Others might have done it in December. There's usually a couple different calendars that most districts follow. So if you haven't had that conversation yet in your district, make sure and ask about the training plan for the superintendent evaluation. So changing now from the board as a whole to the individual board member standards, let's take a look at the first one. And of course, we've got our principles before we do that. And so here in the, again, looking at the individual board member, we've got advocacy, civility, courage, empathy, inquiry, integrity, regard for authority of the board, and selflessness. Those were the principles identified. And again, you can see those definitions in that glossary. So the first standard for individual board members is that the individual school board member is motivated by and focuses on what is best interest of all students. And sometimes that's hard. You're going to have competing needs for students with limited amounts of money. And so how do you keep that focus on all the students? Well, let's see what some of those questions look like. Does the board member primarily concern him or herself with the goals that have been identified in the district plan? Again, always going back and using that as a guidepost for some decision making. Does the board member demonstrate concern for all students in action, deed, and decisions? You were elected because you had a platform, and that may be interpreted by some that you're going to represent segments of your student population. So really thinking about how is it that I demonstrate that I'm, concerning, all students, right? What does that look like in my practice? Is the board member able to set aside personal issues and participate as a member of the board? Sometimes it's going to be hard, but you're going to have to take your parent hat and sort of set it off to the side while your board hat becomes more predominant. And the first time you have to do that, it will be a little bit difficult. But once you put on that board hat, it really becomes one that you don't get to take off for the elected term that you have. The last question I put here, I can see some typos in these questions. I apologize for that. Does the board member maintain confidentiality when expected to do so? You'll very quickly learn that confidentiality is really important in this work. There are going to be times when the board knows things that the community just doesn't know yet or can't know due to either FERPA laws or due process laws. And so you want to be very careful about that and really making sure that you understand what kind of information can be shared with others and what type of information cannot be shared so that you don't create a liability for the district in doing so. So again, just some of the questions around that first standard, just to give you a flavor. Second individual question, does the individual school board member believe in the importance of and actively engages in lifelong learning? Right? And so knowing that when you come to this work, you don't know everything you need to know, and really opening yourself up and allowing yourself to learn and looking for those opportunities to learn. We've got a whole host of CBA classes on various topics. Sometimes you'll do some of your learning individually. Sometimes you'll do that learning as a group. Group learning is very powerful because you're all getting the same message together and you have the ability to have good conversation around that. But sometimes individual learning is important as well, right? Because of the different experiences we bring to the table and where we might personally have some areas that we need to learn a little bit more about. And so it really is sort of a balance of those two things. The third one, the individual school board member understands and respects both the authority and the responsibilities of the Board of Education. Once again, good questions around that to be reflective about and asking yourself and being really honest with those answers that you give yourself, and then identifying how you can be more like that standard, right? And adopt that as a way that you're going to go about this work. The last standard, the individual school board member approaches school governance work with a spirit of inquiry. Like I said, we do not bring everything we need to know to the table. In my 15 years of service, I continued learning new things that were pertinent to this work right up until the day I left the board. And so, but that only happens if you are working with a spirit of, you understand that learning is important and it's ongoing. I would say, know that for each of these standards, right, identified in both of these categories, the whole board and the individual, that, there's a number of those questions. And really, like I said, they're intended to encourage the dialogue for your governance team. And so I really hope that you'll take a look at the whole document. Again, like I said, it's downloadable from the website. And I think you'll get a lot out of it, both individually and with your colleagues at the board table. So we've packed a lot of content into a short time just to give you a sense of what this work looks like. I hope that you'll look at today's webinar as just a single piece in your learning puzzle. I do appreciate the fact that you have joined us for this short piece, and that you'll commit to continue adding those puzzle pieces, not only throughout this year, your first year, but throughout your board service. And so with that, I think you've heard enough from me. And so I know Larissa has been watching the chat to see if there were any questions. Maybe if you had some questions that you thought, areas you thought we would cover, we certainly would be, we can open it up for questions at this point. You can go ahead and type it in the chat, and Larissa can feed them to me. And then we'll let you get back to your work day. But I've left enough time, which is rare for me. Sometimes I spend a lot more time talking. So Larissa, do we have any questions already in our chat? I'm going to stop sharing. And maybe I can turn my camera back on so you're actually talking to a person.
The first question, do the CBA classes have a cost?
Yes, CBA classes do have a cost. I believe we just changed the prices. I believe they're $149, of which the base level classes, the 100, which is there's a series of 9 after that first one, or 8, and those are reimbursable from the state up to $99 of that fee. So by all means, take advantage of that money that the state has put aside in a fund. You take the class, your district pays for it, and then they can submit for reimbursement for those classes. Do we have more questions, Larissa?
Nope.
That's all? Okay. Oh, there's something about lawmakers. Thoughts or recommendations on how board members can effectively engage with state and federal lawmakers on behalf of our districts. There is actually a class on that. You're absolutely right. In the 100, well, there's one about working with your legislature. But I will tell you this. I actually served as a lobbyist for 5 years for a different education group. And my best advice always to my members at the time, and still is here, is be proactive in your approach. Reach out to them early in their tenure as a legislator, and really start to establish a relationship with them. Now, many of you might say, oh, I already know the feelings of my legislator. We're not on the same page. We're never going to agree. But they need to still hear from you. They need to understand that, you have an understanding of how legislation affects your school districts and your students better than others would. And so you together working with your superintendent can really paint a well-rounded picture, because what sounds good in a legislative document might not play out so well. But you have to start forming the relationship early so that when something is important that needs some attention that you might not want them to vote for, or you do want them to support, you've already formed the relationship. And then they're much more likely to listen to what you have to say and to take that in as part of their decision-making process. So proactive approach, invite them into the district early and often, let them really see what things look like in your district, how students are, engaging, what your staff looks like in instructional periods. Invite them in to do March's Reading Month. That's coming up soon. Those are always good opportunities, again, to start that conversation with them. And then just make it a regular thing, right? It's not a one and done. It's touching base with them every so often, and actively engaging, paying attention, especially to the information that our lobbyist, our government relations director, Jen, puts out, and actively engaging in that as well when she's asking you to contact and reach out to your legislators. All right, let's see what else. Do we have some more things? So is it best to have the superintendent evaluation committee as a whole? Absolutely. There might be a subcommittee who works on the details of it, the process, the tool, those kinds of things. But you have a responsibility as a whole board to evaluate your superintendent. And like I said, it is the only requirement for training from the legislature for school board members. It is the way you hold your superintendent accountable for all of the work that goes on in a district. And so once again, it's a valuable opportunity for reflection on the year and then talking about how are we going to make it even better next year. So that's something that we all should want to be a part of. There might be some difficult conversations sometimes in that evaluation process where we might have some disagreements around some issues. But it's working through those disagreements that again is going to improve the relationship you have working with your superintendent, and that's only going to lead to good things for the district and its students. So with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have. Know that we are always here to support you. So as a new board member, most of the phone calls I take are from your board presidents or superintendents, but by all means, we're here for you as well. And so, if you hear something and maybe it just doesn't sound right, or you have questions about it, there's a lot of resources. I would encourage you to look on our bookstore for some of those resources. There's an Open Meetings Act guide. There's a revised school code book that really helps break it down into, more manageable language. And then there's a favorite book I have, and I don't get any kickback from the National School Boards Association for helping to sell it. But there's a book called Becoming a Better Board Member. It's about an inch thick. I used to refer to it as my school board Bible. We sell it on our website. It's actually cheaper than if you buy it through NSBA. And what a resource that book is. I still have my original dog-eared copy. I turned to it so often in my first year and even beyond that it was worth every penny. And ask your board president or your superintendent what kind of budget the board has for resources like that for your learning. Most districts are more than happy to provide those resources. You just need to ask, and your administrative assistant can get those ordered for you. And Larissa just gave you the link to the bookstore. We've got, like I said, some great items in there. There's another one called Surviving Your First Year. And so, that's another good read too. I see another question about legal issues as far as confidentiality. Where can a board member find those laws explained along with other pertinent laws? So those would be those two documents I would refer to first, that Open Meetings Act guide and that revised school code guide. Both of those will have a lot of that information for you. And then we also have 2 lawyers on staff. Brad Banasic is our director of legal and policy issues, and he's always available to answer questions as well. I would definitely suggest that you take the CBA class around the legal issues, the 100 level class, and then his Open Meetings Act class is excellent. I mean, he is a guru in the state for school law. He's been with MASB for 25 years and really is considered one of the top education legal minds, if you will, in the state. So you have him to take advantage of, and there's no fee like it is when you call your lawyer. Can we please provide links to the resources that were referenced? Yeah, absolutely. If we don't get them all here, Again, like I said, Larissa's on here. She's going to send you that email. You can probably look for it on Friday. Like I said, it'll have the recording, it will have the PowerPoint, and then links to the various things that we've discussed today. So you don't feel like you have to capture it right this very second. We'll make sure you have that information.